You ever feel like you could use bigger faith, more faith? Sometimes people talk about faith as if it came in sizes: small, medium, large, grande, venti, big gulp. And I suspect that's because often this idea of faith gets conflated with belief or beliefs. That there can be this notion that if you have lots of beliefs about lots of things, beliefs especially about God or about a particular religion, that you have lots of faith, people will say. And then if you have more maybe doubts than beliefs, there can be this idea of, oh, I have little faith or not enough faith. And this is a good time to remind us that the word that gets translated as faith in English, the word that's there in the Greek New Testament, it's not about beliefs. It's not a word that means your intellectual assent to certain propositions. The word that's there is a relationship word. And the word probably best is translated into English as trust. 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 So when you see faith in the Bible, if you substitute in trust me, it's helpful. So, now trust really is something that in any given moment we're doing or we're not. It's an action. It's a choice. Now, I recognize sometimes we talk about trust as if it also came in sizes. And I've done it too, where it's sort of like, oh, I sort of trust that person, or I don't trust her very much. But what we usually mean is that in any given moment, I don't trust that person, and I wish I did. Or in any given moment, I do trust that person, and I hope to trust that person more often, for example. But in any slice of time, we are usually trusting or we are not. And I think a great illustration of how that works comes in the kind of cliched trust exercise that you might have done if you were ever in a church youth group or went to summer camp. And that's the one where you are standing, and maybe you're blindfolded with your arms like this, and there's someone behind you with their arms out to catch you. Anyone ever at least been invited to do this? All right, so you've seen this. So though in that exercise, you're either going to do it or not, right? I mean, you might get started like, oh, no, I don't. But in that moment, there's trust or there's not. We can't just, 30% fall or 75% fall. So there's either, nope, not going to do it, or a surrendering into it and being caught and received, hopefully. And so that's a reminder that trust isn't so much a feeling as a choice. So because I've never done that exercise and felt comfortable, like, it's all good, right? It's like, okay. But I still can choose to trust. And so I think all of this is helpful to keep in mind as we look at the story in our gospel reading today, where the disciples, it's after Jesus has been teaching about some things that are really hard and it feels complex, and the disciples' response isn't, all right, here we go. It's, oh God, increase our faith. Could we get, could you supersize me, Jesus? Mine feels small. I need a large. And then Jesus, and now when we understand the context, when he responds to them, he's reminding them, it's not that you need more beliefs or no doubts. It's you can just practice some trust. Because if you trust in any given moment, just open yourself to God the tiniest mustard seed bit, Jesus says. Well, then you're connecting with a power that is transformative. So it's not like you have to just have no doubts or fears and just like, yeah, come on, God, just work through me. Just the tiniest bit, he says, mustard seed size. And that he says, when you do that, you could say to that mulberry bush, be uprooted and planted over here. Now, if we're critical thinkers, we might wonder, how is that a useful power? Right? I mean, unless you're a landscaper tasked with removing mulberry bushes, you're thinking, well, I don't know how much good that one does me. And so that's a reminder, of course, there's symbolism here. One New Testament professor, Barbara Reed, I've talked about this in other occasions when this passage came up. She notes that the mulberry bush has a very entrenched and kind of, you might say, gnarly root system, and it's hard to get a mulberry bush out. And therefore, mulberry bushes become an apt metaphor for entrenched systems of injustice and oppression. And so there's this idea, Jesus is saying, listen, when you just open in each given moment, just the littlest bit, You connect with a power that can be at work in and through you, that can engage what seems hopeless or where you feel helpless. And it's also not a mistake or coincidence that there's other small things he could have chosen, but he chose the mustard seed, and we get hints from other places about why mustard seed is a good one, a good metaphor, because in another parable, Jesus notes that the mustard seed, he says it's really small, but it grows into this giant shrub, and birds nest in the branches, and why that matters is because the birds eat the mustard, and then the birds excrete the mustard all over your field. And therefore, the mustard seed is a tenacious weed that can transform the landscape. So in this image he's giving his disciples, you just have the smallest bit of trust in any given moment. You're connecting with a power that can engage the systems that seem intractable, and you're part of what can transform the landscape. So it's not that you're free of doubts. It's not that you have a long list of all your beliefs. He's saying if you just practice trust in any given moment, you tap into this kind of power that can be at work in you and through you. And then he offers a picture of, well, what does that look like? How can it be done? And uses an image that is really familiar to people in his time and to us in our time is offensive and troubling, right? Worthless slave, you did what you should have done, right? That's the picture here. I don't relate to that, never been there in those situations. But for the people, and this is more of, slave isn't quite the right word because they're more servants. And the words get used interchangeably, but still, there's this idea of there's people, it's their job, and if you just do your job, you don't do it so you get some special reward or special power or privilege. He's giving this picture of, you know how it works. You've covenanted, you've agreed to do this work, and you do it humbly, and you just do it. And so I think he's using that to help the disciples understand that this practice of trust, by following him, even though they don't always feel it, and even though they might want to think they're better than other people, it's like stay humble and just keep doing it. You've agreed to follow, just keep doing it. Just keep doing it. Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. Right. What's that film? Finding Nemo, sorry. Finding Nemo is the reference there. But you just do it. And so again, I've never worked for someone plowing the field. It feels somewhat like what he's describing. And the thing that I was thinking of was being in a choir. And that is, so I sang as a kid and even some in graduate school, but a lot of years went by and I kind of lost touch with what's it like to actually sing in a choir. But I joined the University of Arizona Community Chorus in early 2020. And I remember as the professor who's leading it, she got us started with these warm-up exercises that felt utterly ridiculous to me. We're like doing things with our lips and like nya, 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 to the people around, like all these things. I'm like, what is this? And I felt embarrassed and humiliated to do it. But my covenant was I am part of this choir, and what that means is I'm going to follow the directions of the director. Yeah, Daryl, right? That's what choir members follow, the directions of your director. That's the covenant. And so even though I didn't feel like I got why we were doing it, I just did it because I needed to practice that trust. Because if I didn't or the other people didn't, it'd just be a mess. So what happened, though, is I started to see that she would do these various exercises that actually connected with some of the music we were going to rehearse. She was getting us ready for it. I just didn't know enough. So it also, by the way, that experience helped me when she offered the next ridiculous warm-up. All right, I get it. All right, I'm going to do it, even though I feel embarrassed or it feels strange. I just did it. And so by practicing the trust, it made it easier to practice trust the next time because there was method to the seeming madness. And so because I kept practicing that trust, I could then join the song. So I think this is what Jesus is helping his disciples understand in their own context. And so we can think of really anything that we would call a spiritual discipline or practice. Those are trust practices. And sometimes they're really little things. So to start with a morning prayer, there's a million other things you could do. But to go ahead and start with that is giving yourself, you're practicing trust. And especially if you weren't feeling it that morning, but you did it anyway, practicing trust. gathering in community, online, in person for worship. There's a million other things you could be doing right now. And some of you maybe even feel guilty that you're not doing them, right? There's this pile of work or something that's over here, but you're practicing trust, that there's something in gathering in spirit and community that could be of value to you, to the world. Meditation, your yoga, that you exercise, whatever it is, but there's these little trust practices, and they can help then open us to that power. So it's not like necessarily big deal things, but these little mustard seed bits that keep connecting us with a power that can transform the landscape. And I think this is also what Paul's talking about when he's writing this letter to Timothy that you heard. First, I love there's, Grandma Lois and Mother Eunice, this idea of intergenerational, right? That what the grandmother and the mother are trusting and living can come to the grandson and the son. So he's saying you've learned this from them, but he also is reminding him, though, this trust that you know from them, it's not automatic. There's your job, your role. And he says, so stir up the gift that has been given to you. Stir up the gift. And that is a fire tending image. But we're getting lots of images, right? We've got agriculture, we've got fire tending. Sometimes some of you maybe are that person where there's a campfire or a fire in the fireplace and you're that person poking at it, right? And everyone else is really thankful for the person willing to poke at it. But why do we poke at the fire? Well, some of us are just obsessive, but the real reason is we're shifting it a little bit, right? Mustard seed amounts to make a little more room for the oxygen to get in. Now, we didn't make the flame, we didn't make the fuel, but by tending it, just little bits here and there incrementally, the flame gets stronger. More heat, more light comes forth. And that's what this idea of these trust practices are. It's like poking, it's just little bits, but by moving and shifting just little bits, it lets more air in, and then there's more light, there's more heat, there's more energy, so it can be lived. And all of that really can be helpful when everything's hard, especially when everything's hard. Because, if we're already feeling like we're sort of stuck in the dark and we didn't tend the fire and now it's just out, it's a lot harder to get it started again. So it's often better that we've been doing a little bit of poking and it keeps it lit. And so the practices, those little mustard seed practices, keep us connected. So especially when we run into what feels entrenched or hopeless. And sometimes that happens in our personal life. Sometimes it happens in our collective life. I'm hearing lots of people in recent years feeling it more and more collectively, like, oh my gosh, the things are entrenched and broken and it's so hard. Habakkuk is running into that in the passage that you heard. And he's a good complainer. By the way, if you were taught, don't complain to God or else God will smite you or something, these are people who didn't clearly read the Bible. Because it's full of people complaining to God, because part of the lament, the complaint, is authentic prayer. If we're distressed, say it, pray it, because then it makes room for responses. And that's what we hear with Habakkuk. So though it's not like he's new to the game. I mean, he's been a prophet listening for how God's still speaking, but he's run into this really hard, disappointing situation, and it feels like it's all over. It feels like it's done. He feels like quitting and giving up. God, where are you? But then, because he's been practicing, he says, but I'll just do it. He's not feeling it. He's not feeling like God's going to come through, but he just does it. I will stand there. I will listen for how God is still speaking. And that opens him, that little mustard seed, that choice opens him to a new word, refreshing start, and he can share it. It becomes a gift for other people. And I relate to this. I think about numerous times, and it's always this irony, I think, in terms of our spiritual lives, that often when things are most stressful or challenging, that's when we're sometimes most tempted to skip whatever grounds us, whatever heals us, whatever helps us. Well, I don't got time for that. And I was remembering, as I was pondering this message this week, a time where I was getting ready for a sabbatical, which is an amazing thing to get to have. I was moving toward a sabbatical, but it's really hard to get there because there's the planning for the elements of the sabbatical and the funding and the make sure you got this or tickets for that or have you registered for this, and you're preparing your community and staff for operating without you for 3 months. So even though there's this great gift looming on the horizon of a 3-month sabbatical, there's a lot of pressures and things. And I remember there was this one morning in particular where I was like, oh gosh, there's just so much to do. I'm just going to skip it. Get to it. Open my email, get started, instead of my normal prayer and journaling and listening. But then there was this, like, I caught myself. Wait a minute. You're not feeling it this morning, but just do it. Just engage the practice. Trust what you know has worked and is working. So part of why I'm remembering this is in that morning prayer time, in the silence and the listening, this image came to me. I was already a volunteer for a weekly after-school, I went weekly to an after-school program in an underserved neighborhood in the north end of Hartford, Connecticut. And it was run by a ministry, so it was Christian-based, but we were helping the kids with homework. There was also stories and crafts, and the kids came to this center after school, and so I went once a week. Well, in the summer, they did day camps, full day camps, and I couldn't normally do that. I couldn't, commit to full days for the entire week, but my sabbatical was coming, and I could. I had this image of saying yes, because they were still needing counselors, so I said yes. And so eventually we got to that point in the summer, and the camp was starting. I remember driving from the leafy green suburban areas of Hartford with the manicured parks, and then I got into this neighborhood where we were going to have the camp mostly taking place around a park and playground with outdoor activities, because these are kids with lots of energy, but the park had dead grass and dilapidated fencing. The playground was all right, and that's why we were using it, but it was not cared for in the same way. And there was trash blowing around and boarded up buildings. And I remember feeling nervous. I felt nervous every time I drove in there. And I thought about the children I'm working with. This is where they live. I'm a grown man, and I feel nervous being here. This is their everyday. So I was assigned to this group of 10-year-olds, smaller group, and they're my group for the week. And one of them, though, this little boy, shut down and belligerent. And also, having at different times worked with youth groups and children's groups, it often feels like there's always one, the belligerent one, the one who's going to want to derail things. And so that was my initial thought and response. But a little way into the day, one of the directors of the camp came to me and said, sorry I didn't get to tell you this ahead of time, but I just want you to know, and reference this particular little boy. He just recently lost his father. Okay. So I also knew this informed how I was going to be praying in this week. And so my morning prayer became bringing this little boy to mind and asking, I don't know what I can do or how I can offer, but the child who feels like they're going to be my problem, I'm to be their gift. So God, help me do that. There was this one afternoon where there were some snacks on the other side of the play area, and I asked, would someone volunteer to walk with me over there and get them and bring them back? And that little boy volunteered. So we're walking across this big open space together, and he said to me, the way that you or I might say, oh, it's sunny. He said to me, my dad was killed in a drive-by shooting last week. It knocked the wind out of me. I took another breath in because I recognized I'm on holy ground here. And I said something about, I'm really sorry, and just, offering that kind of sympathetic presence to that moment and trying to and not ask a bunch of questions or help me know what to do, what to say, which mostly is just about being present, not about what you say. And then a reminder, this is a Christian ministry, so there'd been like some God stories, etc. So this is probably what prompts this question to me. He does not know I'm a pastor. I'm just Mr. Michael volunteering. But he says, my aunt and uncle say that because my dad did bad things, he's in hell. And then he teared up. So I was able to say to him in that invitation, I don't believe that's true. I think God knows better than even your dad about why he might have made some bad choices, but that right now God holds your dad, loves him, forgives him. I think that's who God is. And he just looked at me. He quickly leaned in and gave me this side hug, and then he ran off to the snacks. That was it. Now, I have no illusions that I somehow made this incredible difference in the life of this young boy. And I don't tell you this story so you say, oh, how wonderful Michael is to have those conversations. I tell you this story because what happened was not about me, it's about any of us. It's about what happens when we give God the mustard seeds, when we open up, when we practice that trusting, that we tap into something. Because if I hadn't done it, I would have missed all of this. There's that back to that one day like, oh, I don't have time for prayer or listening. I could have missed all the opportunity. And so we're reminded today, it's not that you need to be free of doubt. It's not that you have to have a long list of all the important, wonderful things you believe. It's about the practice each day, giving God just those little bits, moment by moment, which then makes it easier often in the next moment to practice the trust that taps into a power that uproots all kinds of difficult, challenging things and can replant new things, new life. Mustard seed, that's all we need. And one step at a time, one day at a time, I believe that's what we can do. And then God can do beautiful, creative, healing, hoping things through us. And that's good news. Amen.